we engaged Ron to come and do a corrosion control study for the district, that is to sample the water to make recommendations as to how to best treat our issue of corrosiveness. And as we're required to have a corrosion control plan. So we've asked Ron to help us determine the optimal way to treat the water under the requirements of a corrosion control plan. So he's here, and one thing I just want to ask you right off the bat, Ron, with regard to how the water samples were taken, how did that whole thing happen? Did you come down and oversee everything and with regard to pulling water out of the system and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, originally I came down to, theoretically corrosion control is a small part, but I kind of wanted to make sure knew the whole system, because there's effects of it. There's always a domino effect in water. If you change this, you have to understand this. But,
right. Well,
so I came down and over the system with Stephen, and we collected the sample outright out of the well bed. I believe that was before chlorination.
That's correct.
Collected 5 gallons, and that was just part of the study, and that was to determine dosages if you go to the alkaline treatment.
Okay.
And we treated those at different levels, and then we we don't do the detailed lab work in our office, so we took the samples then to a lab in the Golden area, and they evaluated the different options, the different levels of treatment that we provided. So you can do it all mathematically, but it's practical. It's best to do with wet chemistry.
Okay. All right. One other clarification I just want to make clear. Ron, his name's on the letterhead, McLaughlin Water Engineers. He was engaged by the district. He does not work for SDMS. He's a completely independent consultant. And I just want to make that clear for everybody and for the record, because I think there's been some concern, at least that I received by email, that perhaps that wasn't the case. So anyhow, I wanted to just make that clear for everybody. That is the case. Ron's completely independent. And I actually just met Ron for the first time as he walked in the door. We talked on the phone prior, but that's it. So anyway, with all of that said, let's go through the report, and there may be some questions by members of the public, but if you could give us an overview and your conclusions. And
before you start, Ron, I just want to make it really clear to everybody here that our board retreat last January of 2011, we prioritized reviewing our corrosion control plan. And I want to make that really, really clear that the board was planning on reviewing our corrosion control plan even before all this conflict started, because we knew that we were going to have to review it because we hadn't had the opportunity to do it since the previous management had implemented it. So it was something that we really wanted to consider, and we have our board retreat today again, and it's now a year later, and we had the opportunity to review all those notes, and I just want to make it very, very clear that it's always been a priority for the board. Okay, go ahead, Ron.
And just for clarification, do you want us to hold our questions,
I think
AJ, until the end?
I think it would make the most sense if Ron had an opportunity to present the whole thing and give his opinions and recommendations, and then we can answer questions.
Sure,
but thanks for asking.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll make it short enough so you'll have plenty of questions.
Well, we're all hoping you answer all of our questions so we don't have to ask them. So.
I'm going to kind of paraphrase the report in layman's language so that everybody understands. The key thing we like to do is don't baffle the board. Don't keep people in the dark. Let them know why and what we're doing. And so sometimes we oversimplify. To start with, what you have in Baca is probably one of the finest water sources available in Colorado. You're very blessed by having a water that has very low dissolved solids, It's pretty obviously derived from an igneous-based aquifer because they have almost no dissolved minerals. If you look at the original chemical analysis of the water, most everything is below detectable limits, which means you have a very, very high quality water. Which is fortunate because we deal with all quality of water, and sometimes treatment can cost millions and millions of dollars. Capital costs millions of dollars every year too, just to make it work. This water is, by virtue of the fact that it has low dissolved solids, it inherently is mildly corrosive. The result, the conclusion then is that the only treatment you need for the well-18 water is preventative disinfection and corrosion control, because it is a naturally mildly corrosive water. Why do we do corrosion control? You can just take it out and drink it if you want it, but we're forced to deliver this water through pipes and plumbing, and if you have a corrosive water, it will pick up metals or materials from the pipe. So the reasons for corrosion control are two. One is to prevent corrosion so people don't drink the dissolved metals. But in this case, it's lead and copper that we're worried about. They are a toxic contaminant, and you don't want your customer drinking that. So we practice corrosion control to keep the lead and copper levels in your water below acceptable levels. The other is to protect our system, and mostly it's customer plumbing. Corrosion control makes your copper pipes last an awful lot longer, and because we're not taking copper out, so the copper stays there. It does the same with steel and iron, generally, except that in most systems we don't have much steel and iron exposed. We've got steel water tanks we want to protect, but they're all painted. Sometimes the paint goes away. It's nice to have a non-corrosive water, but mostly it's more for customer plumbing and service lines than for the district's mainline system. So, then the state regulates corrosion control because of this lead and copper problem of potential toxicity. The state, and I concluded in this got the report's got some technical stuff in it. I don't want to necessarily read now. Has technical stuff in it. It's got a letter of transmittal summary, and also has a couple of attachments. One of the attachments is a letter from Sharon Williams, who's an engineer with the health department. And I put that in there because that basically sums all your problems. She wrote a letter that kind of outlined what the state required and put all of the information, regulatory information you need in one letter. So I stuck that in the report. We also have the lab test in the report. Other than that, it's analysis that we performed. Corrosion control is generically in two processes, or two alternate processes. One is the feeding of a polyphosphate or an orthopolyphosphate. These are kind of black box chemicals. They're complex, long chain chemicals, and different companies have different variations, but they all work under the same theory, and that's to put a polyphosphate, put a coating on a pipe so the pipe is protected from this corrosive water, non-corrosive water. The other thing I need to say is that a near virgin water like this is what we call not stable. That doesn't mean it's bad. It's easily changed. In other words, you'll take a water that's hard, and take a gallon of water and you add a little soda. The pH changes 1/10. You take this water, you add a little soda, and the pH will go way up because it's very variable. It's because it doesn't have the stability that a high hardness or a high solid water has. So what we expect is the water is going to vary an awful lot depending on what we do, because there's so little in it now. Anyway, back to polyphosphates. A certain dosage of polyphosphate is generally accepted to be an acceptable way of controlling copper and lead corrosion. The other option is to raise the pH or the alkalinity of the water, which then has a too complicated, but calcium carbonate equilibrium, so that materials plate on the pipe rather than the pipe being corroded. So there's two methods of polyphosphate protection, alkalinity that makes the water non-corrosive. It raises the pH, it raises what we call the angular index to a positive number, then the water is non-corrosive and theoretically will not essentially dissolve copper or lead. The state requires you to, not only do they require you to control lead and copper, but they've got all extra regulations to say how you're going to do it. And their favorite term in this deal is OCCT, and you'll read that. That's the Optimum Corrosion Control of Treatment. And for some reason, they believe that they want to govern what you think is optimum. And one of the requirements is this report develop an optimum treatment system method. Okay, so that's what that was the purpose of the report, is to review what we have and develop an optimum control treatment approach. First, with the polyphosphates, the question was, the issue really is, if the polyphosphates work, if that's an acceptable method, how come we had excursions? How come we had copper higher than acceptable? And we know it didn't come from the well because the well copper is low. It had to come from plumbing. Why? So part of our investigation is to answer that or try to theorize what happened. And briefly, what we did is look at all the data and analyze it, and come up with a theory that basically the result of that theory says, yes, polyphosphates are an acceptable method. Here are the probable reasons you had excursions, and we believe that if you feed the proper amount of polyphosphate, you will have an acceptable process. That was the first conclusion is that the polyphosphates are acceptable. Sequest that you're using is a proprietary thing. It may not be the cheapest, but there are multiple sources, so it's not a problem really. One thing we do worry about in anything like that thing is try not to buy something that only one manufacturer makes, only one supplier, because you don't control price when there's only one supplier.